Skeleton with rings around their necks uncovered at a 1,000-year-old cemetery in Ukraine. What an odd thing. The burials at the cemetery near the western Ukrainian village of Ostriv displayed a puzzling mix of Kievan and Baltic customs. The archaeologists in Ukraine have unearthed this 1,000-year-old cemetery and a number of skeletons buried with rings around their necks and buckets at their feet. The cemetery was discovered just south of Kiev, dating back to the 11th century, a pivotal time in Ukraine when many people had begun converting to Christianity. In total, there were 107 graves found in the site, with most of the remains in wooden coffins. Skeletons of both men and women were found in the cemetery, some of whom were buried with an assortment of objects, including weapons and jewelry. Some of the men were interred with axes, spearheads, and swords. Meanwhile, several of the women were buried with elaborate rings around their necks. Study co-author Vyacheslav Baranov told Live Science that those bronze rings were apparently a kind of social marker. It's not entirely clear why some people buried at the site had wooden buckets placed at their feet, but experts believe it may have been part of a funerary ritual. Other elements, such as buckets from two Ostriv male graves, were also found in 11th century Prussian, Cremation, and Pomeranian and Masovian inhumation cemeteries of military elites. Baranov and project co-led Vyacheslav Baranov wrote in their study, which was published in the journal Medieval Archaeology. Curiously, the arrangement of the graves was atypical for the burials in the region. Rather than facing north, as was usual for the area, these graves faced to south and west. Baranov and Ivakin's findings were presented in early January at the Archaeological Institute of America's annual meeting in Chicago. Excavations at the cemetery began in 2017 and continued through 2022. In addition to the 107 graves, the archaeologists also uncovered a stone altar. There were various offerings left nearby, including bracelets, beads, and food such as chicken bones and eggshells. This altar could have been used for either pagan or Christian rituals, or possibly both, as the people of Ukraine were making the transition from paganism to Christianity around the time the cemetery was in use. Researchers also noted that the burials at the site were reminiscent of graves found in Baltic regions. Experts theorize that some of the people interred in the cemetery may have traveled to Ukraine to serve under powerful military leaders such as Volodymyr the Great. However, the burials were not entirely consistent with Western Baltic tradition, whereas many Baltic people practiced cremation. No evidence of this was found at the cemetery site in Ostriv. Perhaps researchers suggested this had to do with the constraints imposed upon funerary practices by Christian leaders like Volodymyr the Great and Yaroslav the Wise. Volodymyr the Great's rule did extend into some Baltic territories, and his own conversion to Christianity around 987 AD likely held great influence over his domain. This excavation was halted due to the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine, which forced the archaeological studies to be put on pause. Thankfully, the project still has a wealth of information to offer about the distant past. And this is on Collective Spark by Austin Harvey on All That's Interesting. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.